there are so many amazing things to love about Creative Mornings. And as a speaker, the thing I love most about it is two things. One is the invitation when you speak to Sally and Tina when preparing. That she says, like, try and be as vulnerable, open, and personal as possible. So, warning, I might do that. And it's this theme, the idea of theming, so the theme of mystery was really exciting to me. And I guess there was two ways I could have approached it. So, like, the reason I'm in New York actually is because I just published a book here, and I could have just come with my sort of book promo talk and then sort of shoehorned it into this theme of mystery, or I could have just sort of ignored that and actually just started, what does mystery mean to me right now? And so I'm going to take that approach. And so what I'm going to share this morning is a story about the 4 mysteries that are most live for me as a maker and in our company right now today. So it's like a sort of a tour in 4 mysteries. And I think, but before I get into those, I guess it's a mystery itself that like my job is actually, I make meditation apps, which is like every day that I realize that that is my livelihood as an extraordinary thing. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And sort of mindfulness has just been on an incredible journey from, in the last 40 years, it's moved from being a niche spiritual practice now into like an emerging global well-being phenomenon. It's quite an extraordinary thing. So that's a mystery. And also, like, for some people, like some of the people in the room might be familiar with mindfulness. So, like, what is it? So just to sort of preface the talk, I'll just give you a bit of a demonstration. So relaxation, pressure, tension, calm, hearing, embarrassment, calm, appreciation, itching, amusement, hearing, gratitude. Okay, so what just happened was, in real time, the last 30 seconds was basically a real-time account of what was happening in my experience. And that is, for me, the best definition of mindfulness, knowing what's happening in your experience whilst it's happening. So there's loads of ways of cutting mindfulness. And that technique I just shared was a thing called noting, out loud noting. It's, for my mind, the best technique, mindfulness technique around. But that's just a bit of a warm-up. So the first mystery I want to share today is what I call the case of the missing quadrant. And those of you who, a lot of people in this room sort of are designers and makers, and when you put work out into the world, you get feedback. Actual people use the things you make and tell you about their experience. And as a maker of mindfulness products, it's an extraordinary thing. Like, you put these products out in the world, and I was actually very naive when I first started making the first app I made was in late 2011. And I was incredibly naive as to, like, how intimate a product, a mindfulness app is. You're literally in someone's head. You're literally right there at the level of intimacy of awareness. And not only that, you're not only there, you're also directing them and inviting them to move their awareness and attention in different ways. And so it's an incredibly powerful thing that we're doing as makers of these kinds of product. And I wasn't ready for the messages I started getting from users around the world of the stories of how they were using it, the extraordinary situations in which they were finding value from the stuff we were making. And it was actually quite terrifying. It was like I sort of started to think about who was I, who are we to so when we got the email from the lady who said that I'm emailing you from a doctor's waiting room, and my son's just attempted suicide, and thank you for this app I've just listened to, and it just helped me settle down in that moment, in this moment. Like, that's a terrifying, beautiful, difficult thing to hear. And as makers of these kinds of work, like if anything, our biggest struggle every day is this dancing this line of trying to make something as useful as possible, but also trying to make sure that we meet people at that level of intimacy and extraordinariness. So we get all this feedback from people. And when I talk about the missing quadrant, I'll just explain that a bit. So think of a sort of 2x2 matrix, right? And on one axis is positive and negative feedback. And on the other axis is technical feedback and human emotional feedback. So the example I just shared of people telling us how useful the app has been, that's an example of positive, emotional, human feedback. So we get a lot of that. We also get a lot of negative technical feedback. So that's, your font is too small, I hate the voices in the app, why can't you have content for this part of my life? Why can't I transfer my favorites across devices like that? Like, we all love that stuff, right? That's the technical negative feedback. And then there's the positive technical feedback saying, I love the typography, I really love the colorways, I love the way the interaction works, I love the personality of the design you've done. And I was reviewing, I often just sort of every sort of few months to do sort of really spend a day just reviewing all the feedback we have. And it was only actually sort of like about a few months ago when I was collating it all, and I realized something quite extraordinary, was that there was a missing type of feedback, which was the feedback which was negative, but personal. So we got all the negative feedback we were getting about the app was purely at the level of functionality and whatever. We very rarely, if ever, receive feedback saying, this app doesn't work for me. And I know that's not because it doesn't work for people. Of course it doesn't work for people. So I started reflecting on why are we not hearing from people. This was the mystery that I was just sat with for a whole afternoon. So why are we not hearing from people who are saying, this app just doesn't work for me? And I did a bit of research. I sort of did some emailing and some sort of just emailing some random people and some random stuff on people who follow us on Twitter and so on. And what I discovered was that the reason what was happening was that people felt if it wasn't working for them, they thought it was their fault. And this is the thing, this was the missing quadrant that I was finding within our feedback system, which is that this is a problem that the meditation world faces in general, which is that when people go to a class or a course or try an app and it doesn't work, they don't blame the product, they blame themselves. And that is a mistake, because we as makers of these products need to meet people where they are. And if people think it's not, so this is sort of the reason that we sort of do what we do as a company, is that we look to make this kind of, these practices, these ideas, these principles as accessible as possible, to the point that if people can't, if Bodify doesn't work for people, then we have to make stuff that does. But there's a perception within the users that if something doesn't work for them, then it's their fault. They don't know how to do it. I can't meditate. Like, I'm a useless case. And so that's a really interesting design challenge for us, and that's something that we're really taking forward in the future. So that's case one, the case of the missing quadrant. Mystery solved. It's a quite difficult one to... Actually, there's a couple of types of mystery. I was sort of studying mystery in sort of preparation for this talk. And there's the mystery where the answer is, you can find the answer, but you just don't have enough information. So like this. So a crime case, someone did commit the crime, so you just have to go and find out who did it. And you might not never find out, but there is enough information in the world to solve the mystery. That's one type of mystery. And the second type of mystery in which maybe there is no answer. And that was really interesting. So I might talk about one of those mysteries at the end of the talk. Mystery 2, the case of the 4-point balance. I had a lot of fun with these slides, by the way. They're based on silent movie poster typography and backgrounds. So it was super fun. The 4-point balance, what is this? I'm a bit obsessed by Sherlock, because I've got really strange titles for my mysteries. This is going to be a really great year for us as a team. So when I first made Budify, I made it as a side project. I was working for the Edinburgh Festivals as their sort of head of innovation. I made this app as a side thing just to see. I wanted to make something for myself, and I had a really deep background in mindfulness meditation. And so we never made Budify to scale. We never made it to be big. But in the time it's been out, many of you will know, the whole space around mindfulness apps has grown. Headspace and Calm are doing so well. And the whole sort of space has really changed. And so we've started a complete rebuild of our core product and building quite an extraordinary sort of way to be bigger and more impactful and just more of what it does already. But as a tiny company, we're sort of weird. So when you think of mindfulness apps, there are now more and more sort of classic sort of VC-backed startups entering this space. And we're sort of the most successful indie studio, self-funded, bootstrapped, making up as we go along style of company. And the 4-point balance, for me, is what I mean by the 4 things that we're trying to maximize in the way we develop the new Budify. I'll just explain what those are. And you'll understand when I talk about why they're a balance. So the first thing we're trying to optimize with new Budify is scale, right? So we're trying to make it bigger, more people, a scale of impact. So the scale, the people that you discover and use Budify, many of them get a lot of value from it, and we want the human impact of this kind of practice is really extraordinary, and we want to optimize for that. We also want to optimize for commercial return. We want to be successful as a company, so that allows us to grow and use sort of for example, the way we work is that we take the profits from Budify and invest them into other projects, which necessarily might not be commercial. So, for example, this summer we made a product in partnership with a cancer hospital in Pittsburgh, applying mindfulness techniques in the context of cancer and palliative care. And we were only able to do that because of the commercial success of Budify. So that's really important to us. So we're balancing human impact and we're balancing commercial return. But we're also balancing innovation because as one of the few people on the planet who makes a full-time living from mindfulness apps, I'm also actually quite a big critic of them. And I feel that every week a new mindfulness app comes out and they're largely the same. They're talking to the same audience using the same mechanic of MP3-based guided audio meditation, which is actually quite a very thin, narrow representation of what mindfulness meditation can be. And I feel that the space of mindfulness apps has had an extraordinary last 3 or 4 years, but it's time to kick it into a new generation to be more creative, invent new ways of practice, invent new ways of reaching people, invent new ways of understanding what mindfulness can be. So just as an example, as designers of apps, many of you in the room, as designers of products, the decisions we make as designers impact. So the decisions that myself and the makers of Headspace and makers of Calm and the other products, what we've done, the way we've designed interfaces and products, is defining how the world practices meditation. Because nowadays, the majority of people who first learn mindfulness meditation do so through an app. And therefore, the apps are determining how people understand mindfulness meditation. And what we're doing, sort of by accident, because most of the way that the people practice is by plugging in some headphones and listening to audio, we're creating a culture of mindfulness in which people are only used to practicing by themselves. Whereas historically, that mindfulness has always been a social practice. Something people did together. And also, by plugging in some headphones and listening to audio content, we're turning mindfulness into a consumer experience. We're not creating necessarily independent, creative practitioners with the skill set to use these practices and support their well-being in all parts of their life. We're creating people who just consume meditation content. And that is a very different culture that's not the culture I necessarily want to build. And so we're creating some really interesting innovations in how mindfulness works and is understood and practiced. So we're balancing human impact, we're balancing financial return, and we're balancing innovation and creativity. And the fourth piece is balancing team well-being. Because if as a team, we're making product, as shorthand, let's just say that the purpose of mindfulness is to reduce stress. If we're getting stressed out in the making of those products, then that's not okay. My well-being, and my colleague Emmy's well-being, and the rest of my team, our mind state is part of the supply chain of the product. And you'll never see it. You'll never see the fact that we do things to make sure that when my audio producer is not having a good time, and we make sure that he's okay, and you'll never see any of that stuff, but it's part of the supply chain. I think that's the integrity and authenticity of that. And also, we want to have a good time. We want to be well and thriving and live the lifestyles we want to live whilst making this work. So this is the balance that, as a company, we're facing right now, and it's tricky. With scale, how big is enough, right? How big is enough? How big is enough with regards to money? How big is enough with regards to impact? And how does the money we take, so currently we're entirely self-funded, but as and when we take money on this year, how does it affect team well-being and the relationship towards investors and all that kind of stuff? So it's a really complicated balance, and it's one I really feel, and it'll be a real mystery as to how it turns out. And the final two, this is the case of the blind giant. Let's talk about scale. So I've been thinking scale has been sort of one of the things I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of years. And I realized last year that the biggest mindfulness app in the world will only ever be a small app in the context of the wider landscape. No matter how big you get as a product badged mindfulness meditation, it's going to be niche. So one way for meditation and mindfulness to scale is just to really drive that one vertical of mindfulness. Or an alternative way of scaling mindfulness is to put mindfulness into every product horizontally. And the blind giant in this case is the general technology industry. Because if mindfulness teaches you anything, it's that the quality and nature of one's attention has a direct impact on well-being. And so many companies nowadays manipulate our attention. The revenue models are based around the manipulation and monetization of awareness. And therefore, because companies are deliberately manipulating awareness, be that mobile games or social networks or messaging platforms or news sites, then by definition, they're having impact on well-being. So with those people who are interested in this sort of idea, the impact of technology on well-being, we were reflecting a lot on this sort of idea, and this mystery led us to creating a design manifesto, which you can look at designing mindfulness, which is this idea of what would be like for anyone's software, anyone's product to incorporate some of the principles of mindfulness, of what we've learned as a tiny niche meditation mindfulness community. What would it be like to put that into everything? And we mocked up some designs. So I'll just give you an example of what this looks like. So one of the principles is respecting information zones. And I hate notifications, right? There's nothing good about a red circle with a number on it on your inbox. There's nothing good about that. It causes anxiety, it makes you feel bad about yourself, it stresses you out. The laughs sort of imply familiarity with this issue. So how about we respected that? And so this is an OS level concept design, where at the level of iOS, instead of putting notifications, what if we had the weighting of the app name was an indication of how many messages you have? A really subtle beautiful, elegant it's very clear notification. So looking at the screen, you know straight away you've got Twitter notifications, you've got email, you don't have any messages at the moment, and there's some stuff in Slack for you to look at. But it's really ambient, and it's on your side, right? Respecting your awareness and your attention. That's a lesson we've learned in the mindfulness community, and something that could be spread into the technology world. Another one, when I talk about this is another simple idea, providing exit points. So, the world of infinite scrolls and attention traps and the way that so many content-based companies trap our attention. This is another iOS level modification, which is quite simply, you're texting someone, you're messaging them, and you actually say that, so Santi, the person I'm messaging here says, oh, I've actually only got 5 minutes. And so what becomes here, a timer starts here of 5 minutes. So you'll see across the top. The person you're talking to realizes that the other person doesn't have any more, they're running out of time for this conversation. And then so you respect that time and go, actually, okay, I see your time's up, I'm off. Simple iOS sort of ideas. And the manifesto has 9 different principles. And if you're interested in this stuff, we only published it like late last year. We'd love to hear your feedback. Because mindfulness and meditation is now so popular in the technology world. So many companies use it as an internal well-being training tool, but very few companies let that leak into their product. And what I'm excited for is how, as more and more technologists and designers become literate in this mindfulness stuff, they might actually apply it to their actual practice. So that's the opportunity. And the final mystery, this is the big one. The final mystery is so back in the origins of the mindfulness tradition comes from early Buddhism, if you sort of plot it back historically. And the value proposition of the Buddha, Buddha was a really great marketer. And he had a very clear value proposition. It was the end of suffering. We live in a world where there is a lot of suffering, and it's a real mystery. It's like, what does the end of suffering mean? Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Is a mystery that, as you get more and more into these kind of practices, becomes just the mystery sort of opens up more and more. And I just wanted to sort of share, like, in a way, like, mindfulness is coming to the States at this moment in time is a really extraordinary thing. And for me, like, I've been reflecting on this in the last few days, how mindfulness is in fact a political act. Because what is happening in this practice is that you're saying that difficulty exists, and then we engage and turn towards the difficult, and then we learn techniques in which to transform the difficult into that which is not difficult. That's basically how mindfulness works. And so I wanted to sort of finish the talk with just to share a very simple practice, one of my favorite practices that hopefully you'll find useful. It's called Hello Monsters. So like earlier at the start of this talk, I did this sort of noting technique where I said out loud what was happening in my experience. And Hello Monsters, the technique is quite simply, when you're dealing with a difficult emotion, name it. Name the emotion, even say it out loud. So if you're frustrated, if you're angry, if you're restless, say restless, say anger, say frustration. And then the second part of that is that you say hello to that. So you say, hey, frustration, I'm not seeing you for at least 10 minutes. Hey, self-doubt, how are you doing? And this practice is the most important mindfulness practice that exists, because it basically, if you understand this practice, you understand the whole of mindfulness. Because I'll break this down. The first thing that's happening is that you're taking an internal experience that you're feeling very tightly and subjectively, and you're making it an object. So when I'm angry and when I'm frustrated, I'm like, I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated, you're tight, you're tight, you're tight. But then when you go, there is frustration, there is anger, you're moving from subject to object. And that is massive, right? That movement of the internal to the external is the basic movement of mindfulness. But the second part is just as important, of saying hello, of welcoming these difficult experiences. Because these things are not going away. Whether you, as someone who's meditated for like 15, 16 years, like these experiences, they're just part of the human condition. So we might as well get on with them. So this practice of knowing what's happening, naming the difficult and turning towards it and saying, it's okay, you're there, hello, and becoming friends with it. That is basically the whole secret of how mindfulness works. Thank you. Now, it would be remiss of me to not mention that I have a book out. A 10-second pitch of the book. There's so much attention and excitement around mindfulness, but the majority of people who are interested in mindfulness don't do anything about it. And the reason they don't do anything about it are always the same three reasons. I don't have time, it's too hippie, and I'm actually got quite a digital life and I can't afford to turn that all off. I call that the time problem, the hippie problem, and the technology problem, and the book solves all those.